All right. This ain't just a show. This is a platform. Veteran built, battle tested. Welcome to the Misfit Nation. Yeah! In a room, built from boots on the ground, now we breaking the rules. 2 vets, 1 leader, painting the sound, turn scars into sermons, let them echo around. Artists with truth, musicians with fire, actors backstage chasing something higher. Entrepreneurs bleeding just to get ahead. If you fought for your dream, yeah, you are what you said. If they told you no, if you still came back, if you fell to your knees but you stayed on track, this is your voice, this is your flame. Say it loud, remember the name. No salvation, just elevation. We rise again. From the fight to the end. We are the Misfit Nation. No damn labels, no damn cages. If you're still breathing, you belong. Turn it up. This is our song. Yeah. This is our song. Yeah. Veterans standing with ghosts in the chest. First responders running in while the world second guess. Gold star names carved deep in the soul. Your story ain't over, we carry the whole. Coaches teaching mindset, breaking the chains, turning barely alive into owning the pain. Truth over polish, scars on display. If it's real, let it bleed. That's the misfit way. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. It's Aubrey right now. We're the more than you know. Don't walk alone. Veterans press 1, bring it home. Don't trade forever for tonight. You're still needed in this fight. We are the Misfit Nation, built from scars and dedication. We rise again. From the fight to the end. We are the Misfit Nation. Every voice is fabrication. From the silence to the scream, we're strong. Welcome home. You belong.
All right. Welcome back to the Misfit Nation and your Sunday after dinner edition. I know a lot of you all were amped up from watching the World Cup today and Spain beating Argentina 1-0 on a goal after the first extra time period. Congratulations to Spain and all their fans. Now we can go back to our regularly scheduled summer sports, which are NASCAR for now until football summer camp starts up again. Before we get any deeper into the show tonight, I want to make sure we pay respect to those soldiers that we lost in Jordan yesterday and in Iraq today. We lost 3 soldiers, at least 3 that we know of. 1's missing and multiple injured in 2 separate attacks by Iranian missiles and drones going at those bases. So keep those families in your thoughts and prayers as they go through this sudden change that they weren't prepared for. And no one is prepared for, no matter how hard or strong you think you are. Getting that knock on the door isn't something you want to hear. So let's keep those families in your thoughts and prayers, or in your thoughts if you don't pray, for a safe healing and a gentle ride through the storm that they're about to go through. But tonight's episode, it'll hit a little different. This isn't just a conversation about military service. It's about what happens when the people meant to lead you fail you. Our guest tonight, Mr. Whiskey, joined the United States Navy at just 17 years old, expecting purpose, leadership, and brotherhood. What he found instead was toxic leadership, addiction, violence, suicide, corruption, and the harsh realities too many service members experience behind those closed doors. But here's the thing. He didn't let bitterness define him. He turned pain into purpose, darkness into humor, and struggle into a mission to help others heal. From military service to comedy, podcasting, mentorship, and advocacy, this is raw. This is a raw conversation about resilience, leadership failure, mental health, and learning how to laugh again after life hits you hard. So this is the Misfit Nation. Let's get into it. Welcome, Mr. Whiskey.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate every opportunity to be here and to make an impact where we can, and to especially share about these topics that a lot of people don't want to address, either because they're keeping it behind closed doors, because they feel shame, or we'll get into a lot of different facets that go into why these conversations aren't had as much. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I appreciate this. I know we were supposed to be do this way back, I think in May is when we were first supposed to do this, but scheduling conflict came up, and now you're on the other side of the world, and you're a day ahead of us right now. You're in the future in Japan, so you can tell us the lottery numbers. You can tell us all the cool things that are happening.
Right.
Grateful that you're here, and we're broadcasting for the first time in Japan. So thanks for doing that for us.
For sure.
So, brother, tell us a little bit about your journey into service. I mean, you joined. You must have been an early school starter, joining at 17, turning 18 in service. So you were a young man coming into service. Why the Navy, and what happened along the way?
So to give the pre-context, I came from a home of sexual violence, domestic violence, addiction, religious weaponization, and verbal and emotional abuse. Controlling household where you're not allowed to think independently, where your life is dictated for you. My entire life, my parents wanted me to go to the Coast Guard Academy. They had put me into summer programs to get prepared for that, get ready for that. They did different things to set me up for that path. It was the only path that I knew of that they wanted. And my mom surprised me one day. She says, "I got you a job." This was when I was probably 14 or 15. And so she got me this job behind my back, didn't ask if I was interested, didn't, had that conversation with me, just said, "I got you a job." And it actually turned out to work against her, because it created this customer service interaction that led to some independency. And so what I mean by that is, I was working as an ice cream salesman on the beach, and people would ask me, because they're giving you tip money and cash, "What are you saving up for? What college are you thinking about? Or where are you going from here? Are you in high school?" And it was always, "Well, my parents want me to go to the Coast Guard Academy, so I've been in preparation for that." And they would say, "Well, what do you want to do?" So what do you mean? I don't have that kind of choice. And so they said, "Well, you're about to be an adult, son. You should think it over and realize that whatever kind of household you're coming from, once you're an adult, 18 legally here in the US, go do your own thing." And so I started to think, and I had that conversation of, I'm not going to go to the Coast Guard Academy despite all the time and effort that was already spent in preparation for it. Terrible day in the household. I won't repeat that day. But from there, it was like, what do we do? And I wanted to go into the working world. I didn't know anything about college because my parents had hid that information from me on purpose. I grew up with this very construed vision of everything, of xenophobia, of racism, of what other countries were like, of what other states in America were like, of what college was like. I lived in a very controlled bubble. And so I didn't think about that. I just said, I'll go into the working world, because it was the only thing I knew. I'd experienced some work in the regular world. As it was about end of February, beginning of March, my high school announces, "Hey, we're going to take a 2-week break and then come back. There's some kind of virus thing, and we don't know what it is, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. We're just going to take 2 weeks off." Never came back. No prom, no yearbook, no graduate, nothing, right? And so the working world suddenly disappeared. So now what? There's no working world. This was the first few weeks of COVID. Everything was up in the air. No one knew anything, right? For the first year, really, everything was chaos. And so the military became that kind of option again. Went to the Air Force the day before I ship out. After a couple months of talking to them, they had said, "Well, we're going to change your job on you. And you're not going to be photojournalist. You're going to be a cryptolinguist. And you're going to learn another language and translate into..." Whoa. I didn't sign up for anything like that, right? Very different things. And then he really hit the final deciding factor for me was, he goes, "You might spend 14 hours a day on a plane translating stuff. Isn't that cool?" I'd never been in a plane in my life. No, that's not cool. 14 hours a day. I don't know. Never pitched that to someone. No, I don't think there's people who would be like, "I want to be sitting in an airplane for 14 hours a day." That's a terrible pitch. But my thought was, if he lied to me and misconstrued what was possible for me actually being guaranteed this billet of photojournalism before I even got in the military. How much more could he ruin and lie about my life when I signed that contract? And so I was like, absolutely not. Well, he goes, listen, son, we've got a lot of different jobs. You can't be photojournalist, but if you don't want to be cryptolinguist, I'm not forcing you. You can pick something else. So I looked at other jobs, and believe it or not, and you're well aware, the military has everything you could imagine. Mailman, pest control, construction. I couldn't believe it. It's like a whole nother city. And so I told my parents about this, and they flipped out. And they said, if you don't take that number one job, you just honor the family. You're shameful. You're too smart to be pest control and mailman or any of these other jobs, just example jobs, right? And they kind of flipped out. And so I said, okay, well, what about community college? I said, I don't know anything about college, but I've heard from other people in high school that they go to community college for 1 or 2 years to save money and figure out their major, and it's a more effective thing. Community college is for minorities, for racial slurs I won't repeat on the show, for bums, for degenerates. My parents were like, absolutely not. That is a degrading place for someone of your status. And so I didn't go to community college. And so my mom dragged me to this Navy recruiting office. Gray flickering lights. Everyone was miserable, hated their lives. And I found out that there are two types of recruiters: those who are voluntold to be a recruiter and those who want to be a recruiter. This office was the "you're a recruiter, welcome to your shore tour." And they convinced me not to join. My mom took me to a different office. Netflix, pizza, bright lights, funny port call stories. We love our job. We have a bonus. Yay. People who wanted to be recruiters, and they sold it. They were like salesmen. They weren't real sailors. The other people, they were actually very much like everyone I met in the military for the most part. So, there's a difference between recruiters, and I'm sure you're well aware of that. So they convinced me to join. I didn't really want to do it, but, my hands were kind of tied because I thought college was 9 hours a day, just constant education and studying, this horrible thing. And the irony of it is I went through one of America's most rigorous academic programs, the nuclear naval pipeline. Yet college nowadays some of it is online. You go maybe 2 hours for one whole week. Like, it's ridiculous now, the college program. So I obviously could have gone through that, considering that I was one of only 5 people that made it through the whole nuclear program from the initial crew, which we'll get into that. But yeah, so ended up going Navy side, wanted to do photojournalism. At last minute, they said no, went for underwater welding. And then at last minute, they were like, actually, taking a look at your ASVAB scores, we'd like to make you a nuclear operator. I already didn't want to be in the military. I was 17 years old. My parents said, you're going in. This is it. Took me to the office, signed the paperwork, said, sign here. And I said, if I'm going to be in the military without me wanting to do it to begin with, I might as well try to get the most benefits out of it. And at that time and age, I didn't understand benefits the way that I do now. The nuclear program is not more beneficial unless you specifically stay blue collar side, nuclear side, or electrical or mechanical side. A mailman in the military who is higher ranked than a nuclear operator gets more pay. He has the same exact medical and dental benefits. He actually has more time off, doesn't work rotating shift work, overnight shift, So what they pitched, all this, you'll have an amazing career, guaranteed, 100,000 starting pay. None of that mattered if you didn't stay blue side. I'm a podcaster. None of it mattered, right? I mean, I had to work more hours for the same medical and dental benefits as people who were boatswain's mates. But at that time, I didn't understand or realize that. And so I said, okay, even if this is the hardest job, I already don't want to be here. I might as well try to get the most out of it as I can. And so that's how I ended up into the naval nuclear program. So not a happy, proud American journey. I've always had great respect for the military, but it was never something that I wanted to do. And a lot of that stemmed from, I came from a controlling, abusive household. So being into an environment that's also, I don't want to say controlling and abusive, but where there's a lot of authority and structure, I already had such a negative bias towards something like that.
And then you're overfilling your cup with that same problem as you come from the household where you're already getting beat down into to do things a certain way. And then you go into a structured service. All the services have a structure, and they're built like that for a reason, because people die if you don't have that structure. but you didn't need that again. You were already the angry kid on the street coming in. You were not just angrier by basis of elimination, just from what you went through as a child through your adolescence. Now you just let's continue it for another 2 to 4 years.
Right, 100%. And so that was just a time. And actually, my boot camp experience, I would say, is one that no one else has ever experienced because it was the initial discovery of COVID. And so that whole wave that went through with me, every single day was different. Every single day they were changing the rules. You could never do anything right because no one ever knew what was right or wrong. Mask on, mask off, heel to toe, 6 feet apart. Everything always contradicted itself. Half of my boot camp experience was not able to actually happen because of COVID restrictions. So gas masks, you can't put them on because of COVID. Firefighting, you're too close. You can't, that's COVID. And it was such a weird environment. And we actually went through the ROM wars quote. So ROM was like a quarantine, and people, if you had any symptoms at all 6 of the people in the racks by you would be quarantined with you. And so we started with 100 people. We went down to 12.
Wow.
Because they were quarantining people left and right. And this is worse. We had individuals who would say, I'm tired of this boot camp BS, starts coughing, says, Petty Officer, I have COVID. Now that whole group just got ROM 2 weeks before graduation, and 5 guys who were about to do it and were happy they were finally almost out. One guy's like, oh, I don't feel like doing this. I want a vacation. ROM was not a vacation. Quarantine in boot camp was a piece of bread, a slice of bologna, no mayonnaise, in a paper bag, because the food was, and I don't blame the military. There was so much going on with COVID. I mean, they were trying to get these pre-ration foods, and you had to quarantine and wait for stuff. But you ended up in this building, which was some old Army barracks building that they were like, hey, we need to borrow this for quarantine. No phone. You've got drill instructors walking by every, 10 or 20 minutes. You better be doing something productive. I mean, quarantine was 2 weeks of memorizing all of the UCMJ. That's all you had to do. And so these people were like, oh, I want to take a vacation. They would not only do that, they would take other people with them. It got to the point where my petty officer was like, we're not losing anyone else. If you have COVID symptoms and the rack mate next to you he made it so we were sleeping, no one was ever facing another person. He's like, no, the back of their head was facing them, so they can't have COVID, right? Because he was tired of losing people. We went through multiple drill instructors, RDCs in the Navy, because people were just getting quarantined left and right. Every day was different. So it was a crazy, crazy time.
Wow. So you made it through that, and then you went out to the fleet, or what did you do after that?
Yes, and to backtrack a little bit about my boot camp division in particular, we were what I jokingly call DC Comics Suicide Squad, because this was my crew. They always ask you, where are you from? Why did you join? Well, first person says, I joined because I got 3 baby mamas and I got bills to pay, and is Navy Federal going to come here to set up child support for me? I said, all right, that's a great soldier, a great sailor. Next guy. Oh yeah, I got a freshman girl pregnant my senior year, which was this year. So, I got a baby on the way, so I got to pay the bills. Like, oh boy. Next guy goes, I want to start my own business. So, okay, here's something. Here we go. Here's some improvement. I want to own a strip club, and the Navy's going to pay for it. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Guy next to him goes, I also want to start a business. I said, all right, I'm gonna wait. He goes, where it's a restaurant, so that's pretty good, but every dish has like weed and edible drugs in it. I was like, oh my goodness, what is this boot camp crew I got here? Next guy, yeah, I was basically arrested in New Jersey for, brawling on the streets. And then I got rolled into your division because I clenched my fist at a chief and cursed him out. So next guy, yeah, I just came here to, have sex with all the fine Navy women. I mean, I was in like the suicide squad, so to speak, like this was not your batch of patriotic American heroes that you see in the propaganda. And so boot camp, we got in a lot of trouble. We were, quote, we weren't a strong division or a smart division. We were just a division that was divided. And so I made it through that, though. I was very fortunate that I didn't get caught up in the quarantine vacation scams or just had any symptoms or anything like that. But then even COVID followed me into my naval nuclear training, so it was also a time of when the world said, hey, we think COVID is gone, the military said, we're going to expect it to return. And so for another 6 months, we were still masks on, we were still on guard, which I did agree with that stance, right? If it did flash back, we wanted to be ready, but it was miserable. Being in a classroom for 9 hours with masks on, with all these hot, heavy breathing sailors. I mean, talk about education is already difficult. Now you've got this restricted airflow. It was hot in there. You've got, multiple layers of uniform on. It was not a good time. But the school itself, last statistic I heard was 86% failure rate. Less than 1% of people who get into the military, they say, can even go to this school. And we lost a lot of people. We had 1 to 3 suicide attempts a month. We had academic dropouts, medical dropouts left and right. Out of like maybe 30 or more people in the original class, I was 1 of 5 who made it out to the fleet. Not even because of the difficulty, but because of dedication and persistence. Many people, faked mental illness or similar things to get out. For example, one table in my classroom, one of the guys, they all lived together, 6 of them. One of them got out through, quote, saying, I had mental health issues. And then the other 5 followed them within the next 2 weeks. And the whole group just left, got a house together that they had, took advantage of the military benefits, and went on with their life. Most of them actually some of them were alcoholics, drinking in class. So, we saw a lot of people leave. Some of it was academic pressure. Some of it was suicide. Other parts of it was people just didn't want to do it. And so I was one of only a few people who actually made it all the way through. And I wasn't the smartest nuke, but I was hardworking. I worked 2 to 4 extra hours. Sometimes I worked 16-hour shifts. I got counseled and written up for working too many hours, actually, but I was dedicated. I really wanted to be a nuclear instructor. I loved working with others. The reason I stayed 2 to 4 hours extra wasn't just to qualify myself, but I actually sat down with people who were failing the program and helped them to get qualified and caught up. And there's a couple nuclear operators who were failing out of their program who no longer failed out because I spent this extra time to tutor them. Because at some point, as much as I had hated the military because of my parents, because of the way I was put into it, there came a point where I did have a good leader and I felt inspired and I wanted to work hard. And the Navy ultimately killed that spirit later on. But there was a point where I was super hoo-yah, gung-ho Navy sailor. And when I learned to accept my circumstances and make the best of them, which it took me a long time, I didn't do that right away. I struggled academically, I struggled socially, I struggled militarily. But once I accepted it, I was like, hey, you know what? I'm here. Let's make the best of it. Things got better for a time. And then ultimately, Big Navy screwed me over because of political stuff. And then I kind of gave up after that. And then I got into an environment that was toxic, as you mentioned in the very beginning, a shit that was under investigation for multiple suicides, that had bad news report already in the public media. And then that behind the media had way worse issues going on.
Wow. With all these, in your training, you had suicides. And then when you get to the fleet, there's also, you're in a hot box of suicides there. What was the Navy doing when you were in a school environment? I'm sure they had to do some stop, look, and listen stuff there and say, look, what's going on? And then you get to the fleet and you're right back in that same soup sandwich. How did they react and treat you guys to try to make it not happen anymore, or try to stem the tide, I guess?
Right. Now, for the schooling in particular, it wasn't just about suicide attempts, like I said, 1 to 3 a month or completed suicides. It was also the fact we were one of the highest ARI bases. And for those who don't know what that means, alcohol related incidents. We had a counter in front of the school building as an incentive to have less ARIs. It would count the days since last alcohol incident. And the promise was if it ever got to 50 days, we would have a day of liberty. The highest I ever saw it was 48, but most days it was at most 3. It was reset pretty much every weekend, and halfway through the week, it was always being reset. DUIs, sexual assault cases with drinking involved, all kinds of stuff. And that goes hand in hand with the suicides, right? Now, obviously, it's a military thing in general. The military, unfortunately, has a lot of people who encourage a drinking culture, who encourage an underage drinking culture. And when you have a bunch of 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds together who, especially if they're miserable at their work, at their life, who are going out and partying on the weekends, or in the nuclear operator case, it was also a lot of shift work. And people were throwing alcohol parties called SWIDs to transition from swings to midnights. They would use alcohol to adjust their sleep schedule. And so that goes hand in hand with the suicide, right? Because alcohol, we also know, is a form of escapism. It's a coping vice that people use negatively. And so with the suicides, I mean, on both the ship and the base, we got something a little similar to what you said. We got ACT, which was Ask, Care, Treat. But for the most part, it didn't really matter. It was just another training to do, checkbox slideshow. And to be really honest with you, a lot of suicides were covered up. In fact, a recent suicide on the ship that I was stationed on was completely lied about in the media. There was a suicide note left. People knew he killed himself. They said he went missing during a training incident. And they completely lied to the media. He left a huge suicide note saying, I tried getting help and you guys told me to go F myself. So guess what? I'm going to kill myself. And you all know about it already. And you're not going to do anything to stop it. And he did kill himself. And then they told the media he went missing. He went man overboard. We don't know why. We don't know what happened. He must have tripped and fell. Really, because there's a big giant paper that everyone read on his rack. And they I don't know, they threw it away or they burnt it up. I tried to get a copy of it. This was after I left the ship. So, and unfortunately, that's the kind of stuff that happened. There were suicides that happened that got swept under the rug, reactor side, top side. Sometimes they would hold a ceremony. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they wouldn't tell anyone. And it was rough. We had people that I remember saying, this was supposed to be the time of our lives. We were in shipyard. That was supposed to be the shore tour before we go deployed. But there was more suicides before and after deployment. I've interviewed people and veterans on my podcast who committed suicide well after deployment, or well before deployment. And one thing I always talk about is it doesn't discriminate. It was officers, chiefs, petty officers, man, woman, families. It doesn't matter. But we focus so much externally that we don't look internally. People always say, what are the warning signs? The scariest part is sometimes there are none. I had a sailor call me one day, Mr. Whiskey, I'm thinking about committing suicide. I've been thinking about it for months. Now, I just spent months serving with this sailor, and they waited till the minute I got out of the military, quote, so I wasn't a mandatory reporter. And I served alongside them. They smiled every day. They laughed every day. They were qualified. They showed up. They played Magic the Gathering on weekends. Would have never guessed it. And they called and said, no. I've had other occasions. A sailor calls me, Mr. Whiskey, I'm standing on the edge of the ship. The water looks so calm and peaceful today. And being out is sometimes scary because I'm not there to physically stop them if I need to. And it's just such a shame. And it's not just the Navy. It's not just my personal experience. Every veteran that I've interviewed on my podcast has lost someone to suicide or has attempted suicide. I've interviewed veterans who shot themselves in the head and the gun misfired. I've interviewed veterans who had drugs and alcohol pumped out of their stomach and brought back to life from the VA. And so it is a prominent issue. And every veteran shares different numbers. Some say 22 a day. Some say 44 a day. Some say it's incalculable because you don't even know half of the people who try to attempt suicide or who do complete suicide. I mean, who's keeping track of these statistics? And that's the scariest part, is that these numbers could be way under the par. And so it's a huge issue. And I'm sure you've probably encountered it, whether personally or through people or especially being a podcast host of a veteran podcast.
Definitely. And the numbers, like you said, are skewed. They're skewed to what fits the narrative. So in 2017, 22 was about the average, but that 22, they didn't read into that 22. That 22 came from mostly Vietnam veterans at that point in 2017. As it moved further into the 2020s and forward, now you got the GWAT veterans that are taking up the bulk of the numbers. And you got the 22, but it's actually closer to the 44 side due to the VA doesn't count things that are adrenaline based or drug overdoses or things like that. They only count traditional taking of their own lives or things. And then on top of that, the veteran has to have been enrolled in the VA and had care through the VA for them to admit it. So they won't count it unless they had their hand in it or it was a traditional way of doing it. So all those numbers get skewed across the board. And that even goes back to what you were saying about the sailor who they reported an old man overboard. They do that for the media. It's not because it wasn't a suicide. It's because they don't want the family to have to deal with it in that term and with those terms. If they come out on the media and say petty officer XYZ jumped to his death in a suicide attempt, that kills the family even more. They're already dealing with loss. They don't need to deal with that more. So I understand that portion. But knowing it, like you said, knowing because you were there, that was your ship before you got off. You know the dude, you know what he was like or she was like, and the letter that was written that you have friends that were still there that seen it. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure that someone on that ship did a lot to make it disappear, and that'll come out in the wash sometime down the road.
For sure. It's truly sad. And then also, the amount of people that were doing drugs, I'm a very anti-drug kind of person, but I actually grew very empathetic about it because one of the guys who's getting kicked out of the military on my ship, he said, "Mr. Whiskey, look, I'm not a stoner or anything, but I waited 1 year to get a 30-minute therapy appointment. 1 year I had to wait to be seen for 30 minutes for a guy to tell me, you control how you feel. Don't worry about it. I'll see you again 6 months from now." He goes, at that point, I took matters into my own hands. Smoking weed or whatever it was the only way I could show up and still perform on top of this toxic leadership on these, inhumane hours under these conditions. And it came to a point where a lot of people were doing that. It came to a point where a lot of people had to indulge in substances in order to do their job. And I've seen some cases where leadership's not held accountable. I've seen other cases where leadership was held accountable. I met a great chief who said, "Hey, this sailor was going to be masted for, ABC, XYZ." And I talked to him and I found out that leadership was keeping him from 0500 to 2000 every single day, Monday through Friday. He goes, "Absolutely not. He's not going to mass." And he fought for him. So there are good leaders. Don't get me wrong. But I had a leader, and I'll never forget this for my whole life. I had a master chief who basically said that rank was justice and rank was human rights. That petty officers, you're not people. You're not people with full rights. He goes, "I don't have to justify myself to you. I wear an anchor with 2 stars. I am the law. I am the moral. I am God," basically. He said, "I don't have to justify myself to you, even if you believe I'm acting inhumane, because I wear an anchor with 2 stars and you are just a petty officer." We had people who say, "What's a petty officer to a captain? You're nothing. You have no rights. You shouldn't even be able to look in the direction of the captain. You have no right to talk to the captain." Stuff like that. It's truly a nightmare. Having leaders, LPO who says, "I know we could have 8-day duty day section, but we're going to keep it port and starboard because guess what? I don't care if you have it better than me. In fact, I feel like you already have it better than me because when I joined the military, I had to watch paint dry. So guess what? I hate my life and I hate all of you. I hate shipyard. Guess what? Unless you have it worse for me, maybe then I might just feel slightly bad. I don't care. I hate my life. I hate this. I hate all of you. And I'm getting out in a few months. Middle finger to everyone." So having leadership like that, leadership who doesn't care about leaving things better than when they came. And what has been truly heartbreaking that I lament over as a podcast host, and I'm sure you've seen some patterns of this as well. I've interviewed Vietnam veterans. I've interviewed people from pre 9/11, post 9/11, from people who are just getting out nowadays in this 2026. A lot of them reporting the same issues. So you're talking about decades of no change, decades of the same issues still happening. And that to me is one of the most heartbreaking and frustrating parts, to see a Vietnam veteran complain about the same issues within the military system that a veteran getting out this year is still experiencing.
It's called systemic problems, and if you don't fix it, nip it in the bud, or show that leaders can change and still be effective, it's never going to change. And hearing that, you just served within the last 5-10 years with that Master Chief saying those things. I didn't hear people say that in the Army after probably 2004 or 5. Once we started kicking in doors, I served pre and post 9/11, so I seen the pre 9/11 mindset, and that's how I molded myself at first, and then I had to mold myself into a better leader. had to learn to be a better leader, had to use social and emotional intelligence to lead soldiers the way they needed to be led, and treat them as humans, and make sure that they understood that I valued what they did. And I usually gave them more responsibility than I was given as a young soldier, as a young sergeant, to show them that they had value, to show them that they could be the leaders that I want them to be in the future. And
Right.
it's sad that that's still happening on ship side in the 2020s. And I don't think it doesn't. I'm sure there's people in the army that still do it. I didn't see them, but I know it doesn't happen as rampant as it did before 9/11.
There's definitely a shift, but the shift is slow because you have people who are in leadership or coming from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So it's a delayed process. And at least in my particular case, what I saw is everyone who was a good leader was withheld rank or promotion because they put their sailors first. Everyone who was a good leader said, Mr. Risky, I'm getting out because I can do so much more as a leader in the civilian world than in this military system where there's always red tape and always people above me, where I have limited reach. They said, I'd rather go be a better and best leader in the civilian world than to be a limited leader in the military world. And that really was sad to see as well. But I did have some good leaders. I also had some leaders that I didn't mention where bribery was a thing, where buying them items or doing sexual services for them. And I want to be fully transparent. This was a woman asking for sexual favors from young men, right? Because we always see it the other way around. It goes both ways, right? We saw that kind of stuff. I'll sign your checkouts if you get me ABC or XYZ. And that's just really sickening. And we saw leadership purposely picking people that would screw others over who wanted to replace them with someone like them, right? And so that's part of the issue. You say these systemic issues over time. You also have leaders cultivating, and I don't want to use the word grooming, but training up a leader to be just like them, to be a replica of them. And so then you have these cycles. Another cycle we see, the cycle that is hardest to break, in my opinion, is you have new recruits who have leadership, abuse them, for lack of better words. Then when they get to leadership, instead of saying, hey, I want things to be better, a lot of them get a hardened heart, and between their personal issues and military issues, they say, now it's my turn. Just like we look at the cycle of high school. Oh, it's freshman Friday, I'm a senior. And then the freshmen grow up, and then when they're a senior, they're like, my turn to pick on the freshman. Instead of, hey, I really hated and found displeasure in being treated this way as a recruit. So when I'm a leader, I want to treat them better so that we have this new healthy cycle. A lot of the people, like I said, get out. And then the people who stay in are like, hey, it's my turn. I have the power now. I'm going to task off my responsibilities to the new recruits. I'm going to treat them this way. I'm going to call them nubs. I'm going to call them this. I'm going to call them that. And so unfortunately, we see these vicious cycles. And one of my former friends, a shipmate of mine, he tried to break that cycle. And his senior and rate people said, if you're not going to act like a proper senior and rate, then we're going to treat you like a recruit. And you can be thrown in the same boat as them. And there are ways of accountability. I don't want to make it all hopeless. There are nowadays different responsibilities of different people in the military to report this kind of stuff, to fill out paperwork, to do investigations. But I will say that they are often very slow, time consuming, and they don't go far, especially depending on the rank and responsibility of the person that you're trying to report. Unfortunately, there is protecting one another and biasing. And I highly recommend going through a different command or off ship command or off base command if you can, but there's more structured now to hold people accountable than there was. So I don't want it to be all hopeless. I mean, definitely speak up when you can and where you can. But most importantly, if you come to leadership, take it full-heartedly to change the way things are to the maximum of your abilities, which again can be very limited, but what you can do at least.
Definitely. And while you're talking about leadership, a question came in from the audience from Cunning You Are. What leadership trait do you believe the military needs more of today? Thank you, Cunning You Are.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it earlier, emotional intelligence. That's not just the military, that's overall. We have too many people not recognizing us as human beings. I had people who would refer to us solely as government property. And even if it's true because of contractual reasons, the truth is that perspective and mindset really shapes how you treat people. And so I think emotional intelligence is so important. I did a whole podcast episode dedicated to this because we need to understand that our sailors, our soldiers, they are human beings. They have needs, they have wants, they have personal lives. In the military, it's a balance because it's one of those jobs where you live at your job, where your job, you take it home, right? There can be a separation, but it's up to leadership to recognize that separation. For example, especially on a Navy ship, seeing your sailors in their free time and not jabbing them about work. I think that's one of the worst case scenarios where you're living on the ship and people from your chain of command are trying to treat you as a sailor during your free time just as much as when you're at work. So I think that emotional intelligence is really important because a lot of the issues people ask me, why is there so much suicide, addiction, depression, anxiety, PTSD in the military? It's not just about combat. It's not just about the military lifestyle. A lot of people coming into the military are bringing a lot of baggage with them. Doesn't matter if you're joining at 17. I joined at 17. Guess what? I had years of domestic violence, sexual violence, addiction, religious weaponization, mental and verbal abuse that no high school ever took care of, that the military never took care of. And I'm not going to say it's the responsibility of the military to do mental health screening or care beforehand, but there is no really process for sailors and soldiers to be taken care of before they go in. So you're taking in these broken people and then you're tasking them with very difficult lifestyle, one of isolation, one of a lot of heavy burdens on top of what they're already carrying. And so you as a leader really need to recognize that. You really need to see that. And there's a mission importance, but a majority of the military, the mission is not so important to risk the mental health, lives, and well-being of your sailors and soldiers. If you're in combat era, that's different. I get that 100%. But for the most part, the mission isn't a life critical or so timely critical. That's what happened with my ship. Instead of saying, hey, because of COVID, we didn't get to rebuild the ship on time, so we can't move sailors on board. They said, okay, the ship's not livable, but it's supposed to be done now. So let's move everyone on board so we don't get scolded by higher ups. And then people were living in such miserable conditions. We had 3 suicides in a single week. And so it's really important that we recognize that these are human beings. We're not just government property. Don't call us that. Don't treat us like that. We may work for the government, but calling us property, I mean, it's just dehumanizing. Saying, well, your marriage isn't important. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a shipmate of mine who had a child. He was a single father, and he was trying to fill out paperwork to come to work 30 minutes later so he could drop his kid off at daycare. And if you were a single mom, all that stuff got signed right away. If you were a single dad, you were told that it was BS, that it was your fault. You need to man up. And this is verbatim what his senior chief said to him. He said, you're so worried about being a dad to your kid. Guess what? I'm your daddy now. This is your family. The Navy's your real family. I'm your real dad. So don't worry about your kid and dropping them off at daycare. You're not getting no paperwork. No, I don't care about none of these leaves, these special request chits, none of that. I'm your daddy. I mean, this is just the pinnacle of terrible leadership, in my opinion. I mean, how do you say that to a sailor? I'm your daddy. Don't worry about your kid. That I'm not a father, but no one's going to talk to me about my kid like that. I mean, we're human beings with families, and we need to make the military lifestyle livable. We need to make it be a job and not a whole lifestyle. And that requires emotional intelligence.
Definitely. Yeah. It's not just emotional intelligence on that. Yeah. Emotional intelligence is a part of that. You have to know your people.
Right.
Comes in with the social intelligence and knowing that dude has a family. And when that person comes on the ship, male, female, whatever it is, you should understand them, sit and talk with them as a leader. Your ship must have, I mean, I've had a lot of Navy guys on here. None of them talked like this happened on their ships or in their ways. So I'm not sure if it was isolated to your ship, but you said you talked to a lot of other outside of your ship that had the same problems, or maybe some of them just don't talk about it. They don't think this is that's something that needs to be talked about. But if this is the problem as you're laying it out, I believe a a call needs to be made to hire a higher authority to make eyes come in there, NCIS, IG, Navy Investigative General Service, whatever. Make them go in and check these things out, because you can't push all that under the rug. You don't know everybody in the Navy. You can't push everything under. And if that's how things are, if it's toxic leadership, as that bad of toxic leadership, where they're berating you for taking care of your family, then the system is broken on that, in that ship, in that command. That command is dubious in this whole problem. They need to be taken a step back and see what they can do.
Right. One issue with that. So we had this idea on my ship from what I observed was that, all right, if there's a lot of suicides, just replace some of the leaders in the chain of command and things will change. Replacing leadership is different than replacing mindset. It's different than replacing ingrained culture. And so if you just replace an individual and, you know, who they are, their name and their identity and what they look like, but they're leading the same way or the culture is the same way, nothing changes. I mean, they changed leadership. Guess what? We still had suicides, right? You have to change the culture and the way you lead, not just the leaders. And so I think that's really important. And you mentioned something I definitely want to compound on, knowing your people. I would say there was very few leaders who genuinely took the time to know me as a person or to ask questions. And the best leaders I had did take that time. And I know it's hard. You all have your own responsibilities. There's a lot of sailors for every one leader or soldiers for every one leader, but you can get to know them. And it doesn't have to be this full intimacy of knowing everything, right? But there are basic things that you should know about them as a person to keep in mind, especially when it comes to family lifestyle, marriage lifestyle, all that stuff. Now, I think it's super important, like you said, and it needs to be brought to light. I've interviewed some Navy guys who were talking about they were beat and dragged out of their rack, called an E-nothing. I've talked to people who were beat and discriminated upon because of their religious identity. I've talked to Navy sailors who were actually, officers got drunk and took out their private areas and were messing with other sailors with it. I've seen people spit and piss on each other's racks when they're not around. I've seen a lot of terrible behavior. As far as like Army, Marine stuff, I can only speak to what guests on my show have said. And a lot of them have shared about suicide. A lot of them have shared about leadership, maybe not to the certain extremes, but there's also different cultures in all those branches. But there's still the same issues of suicide and identity and community.
Definitely. The community is what makes it tick. And I was a leader for 20 plus years of my 22 years of service. I was a NCO for 20 years. And I made it my job to know my people, whether I was a team leader with only having 4 dudes or 4 dudettes, or a platoon sergeant with 32, or a first sergeant sitting as a first sergeant and covering down on over 100. I made it my mission to know as much about my people as I could, because if you don't know your people, you don't know why the mission isn't working. If your people are having a hard day, it helps to know the why behind it. And I think a leadership lesson for all those who are at fault on things that you've seen and heard of, they need to take a look at themselves in the mirror and say, hey, what did I do wrong? And if you can start learning lessons that way, learn what you did wrong and make things better, or try to make, you can't replicate what happened in the past. You can't fix that, but you can make the future better. And that's what you have to do. You got to make the future better. And the problems that we're seeing on those getting out, veterans getting out and losing that sense of purpose, that sense of identity, that sense of belonging, that leads to a lot of problems with isolation. And I'm going to end it now because I'm isolated and I don't have the brotherhood or sisterhood I had before. But like you said earlier, some people come in the service with a large bag on their back of things that have gone wrong in life.
Right.
They kind of hide that when they go through their recruiter's office, or the recruiter is also part of the problem for not digging in and finding out, or MEPS, or wherever that step is where that happens, and saying, hey, something's wrong with this person. We might not want to let them in until maybe they get a little help, and then let them in, so that we know that they're on a better glide path and they're not coming in here to escape something and then going into something that's going to make it worse, exponentially worse, just by seeing other things that triggers all that stuff from the past.
100%.
That's a lesson a lot of people need to learn. And I'll pivot now because we have 2 more questions popped in, or 3 more questions actually while you were talking. So let's get these out of here before we run out of time. This one here is from Solution First. Can humor genuinely help people heal from trauma? Thank you, Solutions First.
I believe so, 100%. In fact, it's biblical. In the Bible, the scriptures tell us that a crushed up spirit dries up the bones, but a cheerful word and laughter is good medicine, and that comes from God himself. So that's first and foremost. But secondly, there's scientific evidence. If you're not a believer, there's scientific evidence about it. And then thirdly, humor may not be what heals trauma, but it can be a communication style and an invitation into healing. And so I think that's good to know, that humor can become an addiction, a dopamine high, and an escape, a coping vice that isn't healing, that is actually just pushing off what you need to heal about. However, when used effectively as a communication style to address dark subjects such as suicide, such as cancer, such as insecurities, it can be an invitation into healing. And as well, just when I was in the service, humor was a morale booster. It was also just a sense of community. Humor through inside jokes builds a community. It builds a belonging. And I think most of us have inside jokes with our family members, with our community, with our friends. It builds a sense of camaraderie, which is important for that isolation combation. And then also, just again, it's an invitation into healing, and it can serve part of the catalyst of healing, but it itself cannot heal everything. And so I think that's important to distinguish.
Definitely. That's a great answer to that question. Solutions First. I hope that answers your question. Now we're going to go to, this is a pretty funny name, actually. Ellie Faint. Have you ever experienced toxic leadership in your career or life? You've answered this multiple times, but
I can talk about it post military wise. I think it's a lot of the same issues. And one thing we didn't address, that we kind of addressed it with the Master Chief saying, because I wear an anchor and 2 stars, I can never be wrong. Everything I do is right. I worked at a chemical acid plant as a railroad worker, sulfur worker, and an acid utility operator post-military. And I had a leader who said, well, I've been here 30 years. I know everything. There's nothing new under the sun, in the sense that like, I'll give you an example. I would say, this valve's broken. Well, that valve hasn't been broken in 30 years. I doubt it's broken today. And there was a lot of, your generation doesn't want to work. Your generation is lazy. You're lying about broken parts because you don't want to work. Instead of, well, let's take a look at it. Maybe it is broken. I had leadership that would say, hey, this or that has never happened in 30 years, so it's not happening today. Length of service or length of time in the job doesn't mean you've seen everything, right? There's things that are routine, that are procedure, that maybe are 100%. But there's other things like equipment malfunctioning that, yeah, maybe your computer's never crashed in 30 years. That doesn't mean it's never gonna crash. So I think leadership should have this curiosity and this verification. It's better for you as a leader to say, okay, maybe the valve is broken, let me go look, than to just assume it's not broken, you're lazy, you're a liar, and insult your employees. So I've experienced that for sure in the working world. And then when I was working in the hospitality industry as a waiter and a cook at a couple of different restaurants, I saw a low retention rate, high replacement rate. And leadership would say, there's 100 college girls in this city. Why would I care if they leave or stay, or if it's a good work environment? I'll just replace them as soon as they walk out the door. When you see people as replaceable, as property, or you project these stereotypes onto them because of their race or age, you really are creating such a terrible environment, whether that's in the military, whether that's civilian side, or wherever it may be. You should never see them as replaceable, or property. You should see them as people, regardless of their gender, race, or age, right? And I think that's a huge one. I think a lot of us stereotype and project onto people, whether that's in the military or outside of it. And we need to stop that. We need to stop predetermining people's capability as an employee or as a leader based on these really shallow factors.
Definitely. I had a great leader on my show 2022. General McChrystal was on, and he told me a story of an NCO he had that he judged him. General McChrystal judged him as being a lazy NCO just based on his appearance. And that NCO proved him 100% wrong. And he went back and told him that he proved him wrong and he had a bad vision of him before he actually talked to him, just by his appearance, because he was that older NCO and he was set in his ways. So he didn't think he knew what he was doing. But after he got to know him, and he realized that was the best NCO he ever worked with. And sometimes a book should not be judged by its cover. You got to open up that book and maybe read the first 14 chapters. And last question from the audience. This is from Saul Called. What role should mentorship play in military culture? Great question.
Great question, actually, because this was one of the errors on my ship that I want to bring to light. Our mentorship program at the time that I was serving, so I can't speak for it now or before me. At the time, it was taking a couple of petty officers who had been in for not too much longer than us, but longer than us, new recruits, and saying, hey, I know you already have your job. You have all these responsibilities, and maybe you do or do not have a mentorship personality. Here's 15 new sailors. Meet with them every Friday for 5 minutes, 10 minutes at least. Talk with them, fill out this paperwork. Mentorship number one should never be voluntold. You need people with a mentoring personality, number one. And that's not to say that everyone isn't capable of mentorship. We definitely are. But when you task people who are not prepared for that, who are not trained for that, who don't have a mindset around it, and who have other responsibilities, this is where you see failure. This isn't just mentorship. This is, at least on my ship and in the Navy, I saw your financial advisor, your fitness advisor, everything was someone who already had a job in the Navy, and now they got tasked with something additional. Who wants to be the financial advisor? Oh, you're good with math? You're good with taxes? Okay, boom. You're in charge of all these sailors' finances before they leave the military. No, let's have a dedicated role to that. Let's have a dedicated mentor who is actually meant to do this, whether that's an additional, job, right? MOS, whatever you want to call it in the military, whether that's a third-party civilian company, whatever it needs to be. And maybe that civilian company is made of veterans only, right? But mentorship shouldn't just be an additional side task in a checkbox. It needs to be a cultivation of growth. And so I think when it comes to the military, mentorship isn't just about your leadership. It's about that one-on-one. And maybe that's one mentor has 5 sailors or soldiers, maybe it's 10, right? But it has to be something that they can handle, that their schedule allows, and that they're actually tasked with and trained for. Just picking random sailors saying, hey, because you've been in the Navy 2 years and these guys have only been in for 6 months or whatever it is, you're in charge of them. I'll tell you what the real mentorship was. The sailors who were slacking off would find the new recruits and teach them all the ways to get out of the work. They would tell them all the ways that they hated the place. And so our mentorship was always just older sailors who hated their lives complaining about it. There's so much negativity vomit in the military. It's hard to avoid it. People who don't like their life there will make it very known. And it's hard because I felt like when I loved the military, when I had that Hoo-yah Navy spirit, people who hated it hated me. I got degraded for being a good sailor. Then when I was a bad sailor who hated the Navy, I got degraded for that. You can never win. So I think, first of all, stick to your lane and don't worry about others' opinions. But secondly, when it comes to mentorship, there needs to be a better program. And I think going back to the mental health note we talked about earlier, with high school, with military, with first responders, there needs to be mentorship in mental health, mandatory. And I'm not saying we should just force therapy on everyone, but at a certain point I am too, because so many people go into adulthood with so much childhood trauma, comparison wounds, suicidal ideation, depression, addiction. We have children's suicide rates are terribly high. We need to have some kind of form of help outside of the family, which may be the issue to begin with. And when you leave the military, there needs to be a better mental evaluation. I've interviewed first responders on my show, police officers who went to stop a suicide and the person committed suicide and literally got their organs on the officer. There was no mandatory therapy for that. And the fact that you don't even check up on that stuff, like you said, whether it's at MEPS, whether it's going in, I think everyone post-high school, pre-college, pre-military, post-college, post-military should have an evaluation point. And it's sad, but that is how sick and terrible of a state the world is in right now. And it's better to offer this help, whether the person utilizes it or not, than to just let them go out into the wilderness so injured. We hear all the time, hurt people hurt people. And you're sending all these hurt high schoolers into the world to hurt people in college, in the military, and first responders in the civilian world. And I think we need to do what we can to heal more people, to help heal people who heal people.
Definitely. I like the way you put that. Heal people that hurt people, heal people that hurt people. Yes. Heal people and learn your people, trust your people, and lead your people like they need to be led, not like you watched in a movie from John Wayne's era or even beyond, probably a Full Metal Jacket time period. That's not the leadership that works today. The world has evolved. You need to evolve as well. We're running up on our time now, so tell us how the audience can get in contact with you, Mr. Whiskey.
For sure. So the best resource is coupleonukes.com. That's COUPLEONUKES. It comes from my time as a nuclear operator. Originally, my show was meant to highlight a couple of nukes and all the mental health and suicide prevention and other issues and unique conversations going on. On the website, you can find my podcast. You can find my contact information, every show I've ever been on. As you can see, all of my episodes are categorized. So if you want to focus on suicide prevention, if you want to focus on something different, maybe women's health, human trafficking prevention awareness, all of my stuff is broken down. Tons of free resources, books, every guest who's ever been on my show, their websites, their books, their courses, just a ton of different content on there for you all to take advantage of and to enjoy. Again, I put it forward not as a businessman, but as a free resource center for you to learn life lessons, cultivate life lessons, and whether it's improving something in your life or improving something in the lives of others, I highly recommend that.
Outstanding. And that's coupleonukes.com. It's been shared in the chat throughout the show. His contact is on there and under the contact button there. Everything is listed there. Go to coupleonukes.com and you'll find everything you need to find about him on here and how to get in contact with him. And he has a picture with a dog. So he's got.
Yeah, if you want to see my dog, she's a 3-pound Chihuahua. So
3 pounds of fury. There it is.
Yes. It's like that movie, Tiny but Mighty, the Beverly Hills Chihuahua. Yeah.
Hey, brother, thanks for hanging out with us and sharing your knowledge and everything you've learned through your show, through your service, through your life with our audience, and putting that hand out to say, hey, look, you can contact me and I can help you out as much as I can, much as I possibly can through my podcast, through my work, through my ministry, through everything on my show. But thank you for being here tonight, all the way from Japan.
Of course. Thank you for hosting me. And I do want to make it clear for everyone. Yes, this was a heavier episode, a darker subject, and, it seems very negative. But I want you to take away, what should we not do and what should we do, right? I always preach hope more than anything, right? This isn't permanent. These are issues that are going on that can be changed, and you can be a part of that change. So as negative as this all was, I want you to look at the bright side of it, and I want you to take away, what can we do to make things better for us, for our children, for our children's children?
Amen. Thank you. That's outstanding. Misfit Nation, take that and heed that. Take that into your hearts. We talked about a lot of bad things that happen to people in service, out of service. And at the top of the show, I talked about losing 3 service members, 2 strikes in Jordan and Iraq today and yesterday. Their families are going through it right now. I know a lot of you are going through it right now. Don't make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. I know that hurts when you hear someone say it's a temporary problem, and I'm not in your shoes. But tomorrow is 100% better with you in it than it is without you. Don't think you're alone. Reach in your wallet, pull out that little card, those 3 names on it we tell you to write down. Call them, text them. They want to hear from you as much as you need to hear from them right now. And if that doesn't work, dial 988. Follow the prompts. If you don't want to hit the veteran button, just follow the prompts. Get the help. They will help you. If all that doesn't work, contact us. info@themisfitnation.com, jake@themisfitnation.com, or steven@themisfitnation.com. We will get you on the line, and we'll keep you on the line until someone local can come knock on your door and give you that hug around your neck and make sure you're still with us tomorrow. Until next time, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling, because we are the Misfit Nation.
Thanks for checking us out and being a part of the Misfit Nation show. Don't forget to visit our website at themisfitnation.com. That's themisfitnation.com. Check out all our past episodes and get some of the great Misfit Nation gear for you and your family. As always, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling because we are
Misfit Nation. Misfit Nation.